Good afternoon, everybody. My name's David Stewart, and I am the chair for USITT's ED&I committee. My pronouns are he and him, and I currently reside on the stolen land of the Seminole people, which is known today as Orlando, Florida. I'm going to stall just a little bit. We've had a little bit of technical issues in the background, so I'm going to draw this out just a tad and ask my panel to be a little bit patient while I go through this. So I'm also going to give a visual descriptor of myself. I am a light-skinned Black man. I am quite bald. I have a black full beard with gray on either side of my chin. I wear glasses, and I am wearing, what am I wearing today? A black shirt. So we'd like to welcome you to today's conversation around 10 out of 12s. This is number 2 in the part of a series here. We'll go on for a few months about this. And today's session is going to be moderated by our Valerie Bart. And I'm going to turn things over to her. So you all have an amazing conversation. And I've been given a little bit of instructions here. Please go to USITT YouTube, Facebook, or LinkedIn to see the discussion. So if you're having trouble, please go to YouTube, Facebook, or LinkedIn to see what's going on here. So thank you all for joining us today. And I turn it over to you, Valerie.
Thank you, Deestu. My name is Valerie Bart. I use pronouns she, her, hers. I'm primarily costume designer, but also sometimes scenic designer, working primarily on off-Broadway, regional theater, and opera. And I'm here as your moderator. Very honored to do so. I wanted to take the time to do a little bit of a land acknowledgement. I am calling from the land of the Lenape and Wappinger people, which is commonly known as Yonkers, New York. And I wanted to take a little time to explain why we're doing this land acknowledgement. It's a small yet impactful gesture to honor the first people that stewarded and protected this land and still do to this day. If this is something that you do not do or are aware of, I invite you to do some research and to start practicing land acknowledgement in your daily life at top of meetings, at rehearsals, at introductions, or at the very least, find the names of the people and the tribes and the real histories of whose lands you currently reside on. Next, I want to do a digital land acknowledgement, which was provided by us from Tara Moses, one of our guests, for groundwater arts and unsettling dramaturgy. I'm going to read the statement. StreamYard, the platform that we are using today and many days, is headquartered in what is now called Tualatin, Oregon, on the traditional lands of the Atfoloti and Kalapua peoples. We acknowledge the lands StreamYard resides on because the work we create together on a digital platform does not exist in an ether, in an imaginary void, but is made possible because of physical land and the indigenous people who steward it. Thanks, Tara, for this beautifully written statement. And this is actually a really great segue into the introduction of our esteemed guests here. And I'll go right into it. So Tara Moses is a citizen of Seminole Nation of Oklahoma, Muskogee, director, multi-award-winning playwright, producing artistic director of Tela Tulsa, co-artistic director of Red Eagle Soaring, and co-founder of Groundwater Arts. She is an associate member of Stage Directors and Choreographers Society and Dramatists Guild member. Tara holds a BA in theater from the University of Tulsa and is expected to attend Brown University Trinity Rep as an MFA directing candidate in the fall of 2021. For more, go to taramoses.com. Tara, would you say hi, give us your pronouns and your land acknowledgement, please?
Absolutely. He's Jay, Tara Cho, Chief Gados. So hello, everyone. My name is Tara Moses. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm calling in from the Muskogee Creek Reservation, as well as the site of the 1921 burning of Black Wall Street. And these lands are the traditional lands of the Osage and Caddo, or what is colonially known as Tulsa, Oklahoma. Yeah, thank you, Mado.
Thank you, Tara. Next, we have Clint Ramos. Clint is a Tony Award-winning costume designer and is a scenic and production designer, educator, activist, and producer. He has designed sets and/or costumes for over 200 theater, opera, and dance productions, as well as production and/or costume designs for many films. Clint is a producing creative director of Encores at New York City Center, is professor of design and head of design and production at Fordham University, and he serves on the American Theater Wing's Advisory Committee. His lifelong advocacy is for an equitable landscape in theater and film for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and for the rights of immigrants. Now, Clint, would you say hi, give us your pronouns, and where you're calling from?
Hi, friends. Hi, Clint. He, him, his. I'm zooming in from the unceded ancestral lands of the Mohican people, otherwise known as Berkshire, Massachusetts. Hello.
Thanks, Clint. And last but not least, we have Stephanie Ybarra. Stephanie began her tenure as artistic director of Baltimore Center Stage in 2018 after serving 7 years as director of special artistic projects for the Public Theater in New York. Her career spans over 2 decades and includes roles at Dallas Children's Theater, Dallas Theater Center, Yale Repertory Theater, Two River Theater Company, and Playwrights Realm. She is on faculty at the Juilliard School and serves on the boards of Make Believe Association and Citizen University. Hi, Stephanie. Would you give us your pronouns and land acknowledgement, please?
Sure. Hi, y'all. Stephanie, she, her pronouns, and I am zooming in from Piscataway land, colonially known as Baltimore, Maryland.
Great. Thank you all. I'm going to take a little bit of time now to give a background on this No More 10 out of 12s working group, which I am a part of, and how I became involved with them. So when I was first asked to join this working group, it was a no-brainer. Of course, we should get rid of these long hours, right? But as we were collecting data, reading testimonials, and talking with one another, I began to look inwardly at how 10 out of 12s have really affected me. Along with the grueling hours and undercompensation, which everyone suffers from. As an immigrant person of color, I realized that I was experiencing a disproportionate impact and that this was part of a systemic pattern. 10 out of 12s are an actual barrier to obtaining and sustaining adequate BIPOC representation. 10 out of 12s uphold white supremacy. There is a reason that we listed that motivation first in our mission on our website. Small disclaimer, when we say no more 10 out of 12s, it does include also abolishing 6-day work weeks. What it does not mean is cutting the hours completely. It calls for reallocating of the hours to a more humane schedule. And then another really important note that we wanted to highlight is that realize that Black, Indigenous, and people of color, shortened to BIPOC, are not a monolith. We do not and cannot speak for all. Acknowledge that there are many varied barriers, nuanced complexities, and layered lived-in experiences, but also recognize even within the BIPOC communities, some of our own privileges and shortcomings. For example, we fully admit that the 4 of us present here does not include the B for BIPOC and Black. I'm sorry, does not include the B for Black and BIPOC. That's what I meant. And also that the term BIPOC is imperfect, as some feel it does not fully represent their identities. But we do hope that altogether, however, we can begin to see patterns and start to address these blind spots and oversights. Great. So now I guess let's get started and talking about this whole situation. So the first question that I have is a very general question, which I think will then dip into very specifics, but it's for all 3 of you. What barriers do BIPOC face with tech schedules as they are? Like, what have you observed? What have you experienced? It's a big one. We're just getting right into it.
I'll kick us off. So, theater as it's know it and as we experience it here in the United States is a colonial art form. And so it upholds certain values of colonialism. And what that includes is the extraction of time, resources, and people in order to make the end product. So what we do is that we prioritize productivity over working relationally with one another. And so how I've seen that in my own experience, specifically around 10 out of 12s, is that until a month ago, I had to work multiple jobs in order to afford to work in the theater. And so what that entailed was not just a full 12-hour day in the theater, but it's the hours before and the hours after, and then the early hours in the morning before, just to make sure I can make rent in the same neighborhood that the theater has gentrified and increased those prices over the years. And that's something that I noticed that my white colleagues don't experience. Because again, because theater upholds settler colonialism, it also upholds white supremacy as an end result. And so that is not a challenge a lot of privileged people have to experience. And yet for myself as a Native artist, that's been my entire career for the past 14 years and 10 months, so to say. And that's something that I found in every institution I've been in, is that the other people of color in the process, we were struggling with the same challenges that our white colleagues were not. And so that's just my personal example to kick us off here, but sort of just set the stage that theater as we currently know it is like inherently an extractive and not regenerative art form. However, it's changing. And there's so many wonderful artists like Clint and Stephanie here who are making sure that happens. So I'll pass it off to one of them.
Okay, I'll go. Thanks. Thanks, Matt. It's so wonderful to be here. First of all, you know, before the talk, we were talking about like, you know, where we are, and I feel a little bit, you know, as Tara said, what was your word, Tara? I feel disorganized. Okay, so all of these thoughts are going to be stream of consciousness today. It's not going to be organized. It's definitely not going to uphold white supremacist thought systems. Is what it's not going to do today. So here's the thing that for me, that my personal experience. I am an immigrant, you know, and I am, and I love the theater, and the way we practice theater where I'm from the Philippines, did not have, although we, you know, I think in the practice, particularly with artists in the theater, there is a consumptive element, I think, that happens, right? That we feel consumed by the process, and that sort of fuels both the id and the sort of like everyday thing. And it's always, for me, it's a challenge to actually tease out those two. But I when I came to America, I noticed that the working conditions did not provide an easy path to teasing out those two parts, right? So for me, and so I think what I've noticed is that when I was in, you know, and I come from, you know, my background is downtown. My background in the Philippines is street political theater. My background here in America is downtown off Broadway. That's like where I lived, and I practiced with a lot of like really awesome, like really liberal people, you know, but all of them were able to do what we were doing, and they happened to most of them be white. Right. And I'm going to say that I started questioning what was the difference, right? Why was I like eating like, you know, the 99-cent pizza, right? And like had like 7 roommates, and they seemed like they didn't, right? And so for me, I understood very quickly that it was cultural, right? Like it was the practice of theater, the way it is extractive, as Tara said, has become cultural. It's become culturally inculcated in the form, and so that meant that I had to either adhere to that or I should get out. Right. If I wanted to practice what I essentially have given my life to, then I have to adhere to that. I have to make it work. And I did. I made it work. You know what I mean? And so for me, looking at like the reckoning that American theater is going through really makes me wonder about what did I lose by actually agreeing to the system? You know, what did I lose? Like, you know, would I be more complete today if I didn't? you know. And so it's profound. It paints everything. It paints my everyday practice. It paints the way I practice now. It paints the way I recruit students. It paints the way I teach. It paints everything, you know. And you know, thank you for saying that it's the 6-day work, the elimination of 6-day work weeks and the 10 out of 12s, because, you know, these are, in a way, when you look at sort of the general kind of health of the American theater, you know, these are sort of the malignant tumors, right, that show up. But there's so many of them, right? But these are the ones that when you probably extract those, you can get a little bit more like life out of the thing, you know. So I think it's right to actually address the tumors in the order that they're killing us. You know, yeah, that's for me for now.
Clint, when you were talking about, like, you know, either you, I forget the word you use, but basically conform or you get out, you know, that resonates as an immigrant person. It resonates so much with the term assimilation, right? Which is something that as immigrants, we're told constantly that it's like either you assimilate and you conform and you basically lose part of your identity, or distill your identity down in order to succeed. And that's something that I'm personally also grappling with, that, you know, like, what did I lose of myself in this process in order to succeed, right?
I will just jump into to amplify and punctuate what Clint and Tara are pointing to in the extractive nature of 10 out of 12s and the 6-day work week, that those constructs, and that's exactly what they are, that we inherited. Somebody made them up, and then we all inherited it. and too few of us, I think, question them going forward. But it is the sort of like, how much can you extract from the human resources within a show, and how much can you optimize for the time? And I like it. It is so textbook white supremacy culture that it is hard to unsee it once you see it. Once you know what you're looking at, it's like look, the Matrix. You can't not be aware of it. So I just wanted to lift that out, and to say that if you happen to be thinking to yourself, but I am not a person of color, or I don't identify as Black or Indigenous, and yet I too have to have, you know, multiple jobs or whatever. I just want to name that. Yes, welcome. Yes. And these structures still disproportionately negatively impact Black folks, Indigenous folks, and other people of color. So that's why it feels important to talk about this thing, in this topic, in the context of racial equity and racial justice.
Yeah, one of my favorite things that I go back to, websites, and that I go back to time and time again, is the Showing Up for Racial Justice, the characteristics of white supremacy culture. And it lists all of the tenets, like all of the characteristics. And what's great is, like, there's also antidotes to it as well. So it's not just like telling you this is wrong, blah, 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 but also antidotes of like how to like resolve these things. But it names it all. And I'd read it and I'd be like, oh my gosh. And it's hard to unsee it. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. So going forward from this, it's like just naming it. So I wanted to kind of go on from here and talk a little bit about, you know, how 10 out of 12s not only affect us, but also our family structure and our social lives. And I wanted to pose that question to Tara, and what that means for you as a native artist, and what that means, you know, in a larger picture too, on like what that means in the Indigenous life and the culture, and sort of like the relationship that you have with, you know, time and culture and identity.
Yeah, so before I dive in, just a reminder for folks who, or some information for folks who may not know, there are over 560 federally recognized tribes in the United States alone. That's not including all of those who are state recognized and those who are neither state nor federally recognized. And each one of those tribes have different cultures, protocols, languages, way they view the world and interact. And so I'm only speaking on behalf of my experience as a Seminole and Muskogee person who also has lineage in Mescalero, Apache, and Cherokee Nation. Anyway, so caveat for the first part. We're very different. Anyway, so from how my specific peoples have told stories, and this is also what I tell every Native artist I encounter, is that we've been telling stories long before the theater was a thing. And so we know how to do that. Like I like to say, capital I Indigenous, globally Indigenous people, we know how to do that. We've been doing it long before the Greeks figured it out. Anyway, and so with that comes a lot of reverence, but also an understanding that this quote unquote work that we do is never prioritized over the relation, over the individual, over the obligations to culture and community and to family, which is the stark opposite of how the United States operates, because the United States puts product and productivity over the individual. That's how we work in this capitalistic, white supremacist, and colonial society. Anyway, so the exact opposite. So now you keep that in mind, right? It's for me as an individual, it's never about me as an individual. The good of the community is more important than my individual ambition. And so with that, whenever you're working with a Native artist, when you're working with me, I'm not just accountable to like my colleagues and my peers, but I'm also accountable to 18,000 members of the Seminole Nation, to my own family unit, to the elders within the community, and so on and so forth. Anyway, so that to say now, for how 10 out of 12s in these 6-day work weeks affect me as an Indigenous person is, again, first and foremost, it's forcing me, again, as we talked about with assimilation, to assimilate, which is, again, what the federal government has been trying to do to my peoples for the past 500 years, and is an act of ongoing genocide. So it's asking me to assimilate to a different style of telling stories, because that style is better. It's more productive. It's more important than the individual relation. It's more important than looking at one another as human beings, as having relationships with one another. And yeah, no, we ain't gonna do that. We're not about it. So we're not gonna. So right there, you see there's a huge block in how someone like me, from my particular background, is supposed to engage in the colonial theater. And then part two to that Valerie mentioned around time. So with my specific people, also, if any of you listening out there have ever seen me on a panel, you'll know what I'm about to say, is that time is relative, and that time is a relative. So time is something that has also been colonized, because we have been in relationship to time, again, since way before colonization even happened, speaking for my specific peoples again. And so with that, the time something is supposed to happen is the time it happens. And so this very strict colonization, time is literally being colonized in these 10 out of 12s. And even though the entire rehearsal process with these 6-day work weeks, and you have 4 weeks to do a play and this, that, and the other, it's not conducive to how we're supposed to operate as relations. And I can't be a good relative if I'm trying to colonize and dominate another one of my relatives in the name of productivity. And so it's really interesting to say all of these things aloud, because it's ironic. In theory, the theater just contradicts my entire being. So why am I here? That's the real question. Anyway, but I mean, the answer to that is, again, theater is about storytelling. It is about being in community with other artists. That's why even the colonial theater started in the first place. It's just things like white supremacy and capitalism rear their ugly heads in there and took it away from what the meaning of theater is supposed to be. And we can go back to that. There are artists and there are organizations who are already doing relational theater that is empowering, that is regenerative. I can name many, but I also would love to hear from Stephanie and Clint. But those are just some things to keep in mind. And then also just a question I want to leave folks with is, I want you all at home right now to sit back and think, can you name 5 Native designers, 5 Native directors? Here, I'm one. Boom, gave you one. Can you name 4 more? 5 Native playwrights. Boom, I'm one. Can you name 4 more? And just keep going down the list. Stage managers, arts administrators, arts leaders, technicians, et cetera, et cetera. And whenever you find that you can't, spoiler, think about everything I've just said and really dive into why that is and why something like eliminating a 10 out of 12, making an accessible work week, creating an accessible process that allows for different styles of storytelling that benefits the relationship, like benefits the relation, may inspire more folks to come to your theater. Just a thought, just something to think about.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. Like, so profound, so deep, so true, all of it. Like, yeah, I think first step is if we get rid of the 10 out of 12s and the 6-day work week and this barrier, it's the beginning, right? It's like a small part. It seems like it's like, but I think it's a great beginning to like start the process of getting this adequate representation, you know? So thank you for sharing all of that. The next question I wanted to ask was for Stephanie. When did you connect the dots of 10 out of 12 and 6-day work week being detrimental to the advancement of BIPOC representation?
It's a really great question. I don't remember a specific like lightning bolt moment, but back when I was working at the Public, I was producing the mobile Shakespeare unit, which is a sort of roving. It's what it sounds like. It's touring Shakespeare all over various communities inside of New York City, and the production parameters, the producing parameters of the mobile unit were like, you do the show in whatever space in a 14 by 14 foot square, and you turn on the lights, whatever you have over your head, and all of this is. The model is inspired by, borrowed from 10,000 Things in Minneapolis. So shout out to 10,000 Things for sure. And I do remember looking at the production calendar and seeing like tech, like 10 out of 12s and like tech. And I was like, how are we going to do with all that time? You know, like, what are we, but the assumption was, it was there. This is what you do. And I did it actually the first year. I think it was the first year I produced. I was like, okay, I guess this is what we do. Now, seriously, what are we doing? Like, and I started to, it wasn't like I became aware of, oh, these are the ways that everybody is like this. It is this structure that is keeping people out, because I was surrounded by those structures. It was really more like, it was a logical thing. Like, why do we need to be sitting inside of a theater for 12 hours? And that's just the union. That's the 12-hour thing is just the union time span, right? Everybody else is there for like, X amount of more hours. And it was more like, I thought, oh, when I alleviate this particular parameter and give ourselves permission to not do it, then does anything fall apart? No. Turns out, no. And once I started that experiment at the Public, as soon as I got to Baltimore Center Stage, I was really happy to be in the company of Carrie Gillette, who's our director of production, and Kiara Klein, who is the director of artistic producing. And I was like, how about we, and they were like, yeah, no, this is really not a thing. We don't need to do it. And guess what? We didn't do it. And guess what? The show still happened. So it's really, for me, it was a process of elimination. It's like, is this going to break everything? No. And it feels like healthier and more humane to me because I am a woman of color walking through this world. Then I bet that somebody else is feeling this way. So that's more my entry point into this than like, oh, I see this as a whole structure that keeps people out. It was more like, oh, when I took the structure away, it turns out everything was still standing. So.
Yeah, amazing. It's so interesting, as I've been working with this group and just, gathering data and speaking to various people, like how ingrained this culture of 10 out of 12s is. It's completely ingrained. And it does feel to some people that if you take it away, things will just fall apart. Like they just won't know what to do and how to operate. And it's like you still do. It's okay. The world will still go on. We'll still be able to tell stories. Clint, I'm curious, as a costume and scenic designer, have you observed or witnessed or experienced anything different between the two departments come tech time?
I mean, yes, of course, and a lot of that is based, again, I think I always have to, because we're doing this on the sort of on the 10 out of eliminating 10 out of 12 and 5-day and 6-day work weeks context. Like, I have to really frame that yes, of course there are differences, and of course there are differences that are that are based both on patriarchy, actually not both, on a couple of things: white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism, right? And I'm sure there is more stuff in there, but I think when we're in tech, right, I think folks don't understand that for 10 out of 12 doesn't actually mean 12 hours for designers or technicians or for associates or for a lot of folks who are working in the production side, right? Stage managers, right? That, we actually go into sometimes 14 or 16 hours, right? And so let's just start there, right? For a costume designer, and I think this is where patriarchy comes in, right? Like, because it is considered women's work, it is always sort of relegated as something that needs to be quiet, right? That needs to be, they should, most of the time, it's funny to me because, like, one of the big sort of things when costume designers gather is like, I made sure that so-and-so theater gave me a tech table. I'm like, what the fuck why are we still talking about tech tables? You know what I mean? Like, you should have a tech table, but like the mere fact that culturally it's such a big deal to get a tech table, and to get a tech table in proximity to the director and not sort of like as a satellite moon around Jupiter. You know what I mean? That you're actually there, you're collaborating, that's one of the things where I feel like, hey, costume designers actually get the shaft. The other thing that I think folks need to understand is that a lot of what happens in tech is that, yes, there's the sort of like oppressive work situation, right? But there is this duality where folks, there's this mentality where folks wanna please the actor, right? Like, there's a star-centered kind of approach to the tech, and at the same time muffle the voice of costume designers and the costume crew. So it becomes really dissonant that way, because we are the first line of defense in terms of dealing with the performers, right? Like, basically we are we provide the shell. So I think that's one of the things that those are just like symptoms, right? Like, there's another symptom where costume designers are called last in production meetings, right? So they're made to stay there for a long hours to listen to how somebody wants to recreate that wall or re-wallpaper that thing, or how they're going to hang the details of how they're going to hang that lighting equipment, right? Only to get to the costume designer to say, I really don't have anything, I want to go back. And because you know what, I have to go, like, my associates have to go to Century 21 at the crack of ass to shop for that tie that the actor doesn't like, right? And one of the things that folks don't understand is that, yes, you are teching. All of the other departments, all of the other designers are sitting their asses down at the tech table in that warm theater. There are hundreds of young women and men and people out there shopping in the cold for clothes while your tech is happening. And they do that, they stay until the production, the tech is over after midnight, And then they wake up at 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock in the morning to go do that all over again. I'm just going to say that that's, the scenic designers, yes, we have to wake up at 8 o'clock for what people don't understand for designers is that there's a different crew in the morning that we have to show up for, and there's a different crew in the evening and in the afternoon that we have to show up for. I'm raising my voice now. I'm a little crazy about this. But all of this, right? All of this to say that these are the working conditions, right? How can you be in right relationship with your fellows when this is what you're entering that theater in deep resentment? You're entering that theater in a place of turmoil, right? On top of, if you're a person of color, you are actually not getting the governmental assistance that you're getting. You're not getting the child care provisions that white people are getting. You're not getting a lot of things. You didn't get that you just don't get a lot of things. The white people usually do. So baseline, yes, 10 out of 12 sucks for everybody, but talk to a person of color. Look at where their baseline is. For most of us, there's a part in this PSAB training where it's really beautiful, right? Like it's like in the third day, or I think, or something, where they ask you, what is it about your personhood that you value so much? And you go around, it's a mixed room, right? And every single person of color says, my food and my family. And it makes me kind of tear up, because what 10 out of 12s and 6-day work weeks does is eliminate that. And that is the root of our souls. That is the root of our spirits. That is the fuel. That is the fuel. We are not given that by the government. We even the programs that are supposed to, you look at, for instance, Medicare, 67% of like Medicare enrollees are white. You know what I mean? So when you really look at like what is being afforded, and not because we don't want it, it's just because there are systems in place that make us not get it. And if you're an undocumented immigrant, forget about it. And you're going to say something about that? What are you talking about? So this is just like the baseline thing. Yes, it sucks for everybody, but please know that it actually sucks most for people of color, particularly Black, brown, and indigenous folk. Yes, I went off. Sorry. I'm hungry.
A word from Clint Ramos.
Thank you. But no, that really does. Thank you for all of that, Clint, because it really does lay the framework for, yes, we carry all of these extra things, and this is something that I like have had to look inwardly to be like, how have I been oppressed, right? But I think about all of those things, right? The things that I carry with me, the familiar expectation, the generational trauma that I've been carrying with me, and how I live with it every day. And that's what I bring with me to those 10 out of 12s, on top of all of those oppressive hours and the undercompensation and all of that thing. I think about that.
There's the baseline generational trauma, right? Epigenetic. Right. It's in our cells, right?
Yes.
Every person here comes from a world where they've been settler colonized, right? Vietnam, the Philippines, Mexico, where, you know what I mean? Every single place, generations of trauma. And then you come to the United States where they fuck you over, right? So like I have an associate, like, just as an example, hypothetically, right? Hypothetically, I have an associate who's like, wasn't able to get an MFA because affirmative action actually didn't work for that person. Because you know who the biggest recipient for affirmative action is? White women. Okay, so let's just say I'm going to ask that person to actually stay until 1 or 2 o'clock so that person can go out again and earn the measly. But when you break down the hours, that person's going to end up earning like $10 an hour. And what if that person is a single mom? We're basically saying, no, people of color, you're not allowed to practice theater. And most of us have been, have roots in embodied performance in our cultures, where we actually needed to practice theater. Okay.
Thank you. I wanted to go back to Tara to talk a little bit about your practice as a director specifically, and how, if you have been able to adjust or not adjust to the tech schedule, and if people had been open to it or not open to it.
Yeah, well, you know, people not being open to things I suggest, moral of the story, it's every day. Because what I suggest is that people let go of colonization, and people don't want to do that. But anyway, so to say, back on track. I won't be sassy right now. So I'm really fortunate in that I have been able to advocate for 5-day work weeks in no 10 out of 12 since 2017. Like, that is the last time I was able to have one, because I recognized early. But here's the thing. This is the white people trick. I learned this from white people, and I was like, I'm going to do it. Because they didn't tell me as a Native director that I had a lot of power and agency when it came to production schedules, when it came to how I'm able to advocate for certain things for both design teams, technicians, and actors, and so on and so forth. Anyway, it wasn't until, fortunately, an older white director who's been more established in the regional system told me this when I was assisting him. And also, he was a white man at that. And I was like, you know what I'm going to do? If this white man can do it, so can I. And what's been really fortunate is that I've gone to every theater since then to say, no, we're only doing a 5-day work week. We're not doing a 6-day work week. And also, I have advocated for staggering tech schedules because, again, like just what Clint was talking about with a costumer, why are we in the theater on day one? Like, whenever we're loading in, why do we have a costume designer here? They can be in the shop. They can be doing other things. And so I've been fortunate enough to advocate for that staggered tech schedule, in that no individual is in the physical theater for more than 8 hours at a time. And a lot of that has been, you know, full disclosure, it's been a little tricky sometimes, because there are things that are outside of my control as a director. Like, whenever we go into a theater that's hosting the actual performance and they only give us 4 days of tech. Anyway, and then again, what I've been able to do in those situations is talk about how, first of all, theater is not life and death. We ain't doing brain surgery. Ain't nobody gonna die. So, but what will kill people is overworking them over and over and over again, and like undervaluing who they are as human beings. And so that's how I start every tech process is, you know what, we have this time. Ain't nobody staying here longer than 8 hours, not even 8 hours, 1 minute. We ain't doing that. And you know what? The show's going to look like what it looks like. But what has happened every single time since 2017 is that not only does the show go up, not only does everything get done, not only is everything good, but everyone is rested. It's kind of like all of those scientific studies that talk about how well-rested and valued people are actually more productive are true. You know, it works in science, it can work in the theater. Anyway, and so again, because I had that that opportunity early to recognize the power I do hold as a director, I've been able to advocate in every process since. And yeah, because I was thinking about it before I got here, it really was 2017. We've done plenty of shows since then. I've done shows in New York since then. So like, this even works in New York City. I literally just did it the spring of 2019, pandemic anyway, but like that recently. And so that's the biggest thing that I can advocate for any fellow directors who are listening is that we do have more power than we are led to believe. And there also are these things called inclusion riders that you can put in your contract. And I've now recently gotten to the habit of being very explicit that we will not have more than a 5-day work week in the contracts I put forward to institutions. And again, it's worked. And so I'm just like so fired up about it because it's so easy. It's so simple. It's like if we actually value people as relations, we can create stories together without draining and killing us in the process. It really is doable. But again, white supremacy, colonization, and capitalism tell us it's not. Well, here, y'all home, right here. Hello, living proof. It does work. And like the final thing that I'll say that has also been important, especially as I like now lead lead organizations where I have this like budgetary power, is that ensuring equitable pay across the board. So folks are not relying on those extended hours and overtime pay to pay their bills and feed their family is also the missing piece here. And I know Stephanie got a lot to say about that. I would love to hear from a major theater talk about that. But y'all, we can. It's done. It's been done. It's all been done.
It has been done, and it is being done, and it will be done, right? It sounds so easy, right, in theory, but for some reason, there's a lot of resistance.
Because that's white supremacy.
Yeah, yeah, maybe that's what it is. White supremacy is just people just hanging on to something. Yeah, so speaking of those challenges and obstacles, Stephanie, like what have been your challenges and obstacles in trying to make that change and try to advocate for that change? And like, you know, the resistance and what are the arguments, you know, for resisting the 10 out of 12s and the 6-day work week abolishment?
Some of the things that I've heard, I want to name that, again, I feel like the luckiest producer in the world because 0 of the following things have been said inside of Baltimore Center Stage. Like I arrived and this culture existed prior to me, but some of the things that I've heard from various folks is sort of like, but how will we get the work done? I was just seeing in the chats, but what about the overtime for the production folks? And are you going to add more time to the rehearsal process in order to make up for the time we've lost? Those are some of the really common refrains that I've heard. Oh, and then there, I don't know, there's something about money in here that there's some idea that somehow, to Tara's point, that we don't have enough of anything. We're sitting firmly in a scarcity mentality. And some of the ways that I think about responding to those kinds of comments are, I mean, there's a really like basic way that I always want to respond is like, dear so-and-so, do you believe that racism and white supremacy exist? If yes, then do you believe they're bad? If yes, then you're going to want to just sign on. Just trust me here. You're going to want to sign on to no 10 out of 12s. You're going to want to sign on to a 5-day work week, which is, by the way, historically, people literally marched in the streets. People literally marched in the streets in this country to get to a 5-day work week, a 40-hour work week with 2 days off. And now here we are in the theater being like, no, we can't do it like that. We couldn't possibly. So the thing that I found as a producer is that once you say the whys to a team, like really lay it out, connect the dots. Not everybody is going to see it or know it right away. We have to do the work of showing each other because we are all sort of swimming in this water. But I have yet to encounter an artist or a team or a production person, like across the board. I have yet to encounter a person who, when I walk them through and say, this begets this, begets this, begets this, begets this, that they don't go, oh. And then the fear is, but will I fail? What will I be expected to achieve X with Y resources? And that's where, as producers, audience members, like as community members, we sort of scale our rescope and rescale and reframe our expectations of each other and what success looks like, what finishing the thing looks like. So there's a lot of, I think, nuance that goes into the calculus of how to rescaffold a production process. I'm just here, just like my friend Tara Moses said, to say living proof that it can be done. It can be done on any scale, period, full stop. And it only depends on your willingness to interrogate, to be creative in your problem solving, and to speak truth to yourself and others about what you're actually valuing. Because Clint was pointing out there is invisible labor all over the damn place. And when you start to break it down, if we're going to really look at math, then let's really look at the math and be honest about the math and who the math is benefiting and who the math is not benefiting, depending on what ingredients you're putting into that particular equation. That'll faster than anything. That'll show you where an organization's values are or where a producer's values are. It's all in the numbers.
Thank you, Stephanie. I want to lift up Baltimore Center Stage and what you all are doing. Actually, I've been in communication with your director of production, Carrie, about the tech process, just to try to get, a little more information, to populate on our website. And I got one of your sample tech schedules that clearly shows there are no 10 out of 12s. It's all 5-day rehearsal work weeks. And she also told me that all the texts are going to be custom tailored to each production, because each productions have different needs and, calls for different things. And so all of the tech and the rehearsals are going to be very much custom tailored. And I think that's speaking to you, is just you're really listening, right, to the needs of the people.
Yeah. And I want to thank you for shouting out Carrie again. She's just been, y'all, get yourself
another Carrie,
director of production who shares Carrie's values. That the idea of the radical notion of getting theater out of an assembly line, that's not new either, right? That is, our friends at Woolly Mammoth have been working that way for a while, and I'm thinking about also my time at the Public. For whatever imperfections exist in every organization, the skill that I took away from the Public and one of the values was bespoke producing. You shape and you scale and the resources to align with the needs of the project. And if you can't do that, then please consider not doing the project, whatever the scope and scale and needs are. It might be money, it might be cultural competency, it might be time, right? There are sort of different ways to think about resources, and each project needs a different alchemy, I guess, to come together to create the thing. And I think we've also fallen into a little bit of a habit, a little bit of a sort of stasis, a place of inertia where we're sort of and now we do, and now we do, and now we do. And we can have a whole nother conversation about how that is interconnected to subscriber models and purchasing, all the things. But the truth of the matter is, if we're scaling for each show and producing in a kind of bespoke way, then we have a better chance at getting more alignment and more right with our relationships.
Thank you. All right. All right. Next question. Looking deep into yourself. What do you do to ground yourself, to find the energy to keep going?
I mean, honestly, just bring it back to community. Remember who I come, the people I come from, and do what needs to be done here. There was a point in time where, especially throughout the pandemic, and how it disproportionately affects BIPOC folks, but especially Native people, like when the government sends body bags when we ask for PPE, where theater became irrelevant because what I needed to do was focus on my community and prioritizing the elders to ensure that they had access to groceries, that they had access to what they needed. And that is what fuels me. Because theater will come and go, as folks have learned. Theaters will shut their doors, especially as folks have learned. But who will be here and continue to be here are communities and cultures and people. And so for me, that's what keeps me going. And then also knowing that for every door that gets slammed in my face and my colleagues' faces, that is a potential door that will open for an artist who will come after. And so it's a combination of those things. But I think like what really helps settle is being within family and community, but also knowing that there are greater responsibilities that exist outside of theater that only enrich it in myself.
I have such a problematic answer to this question. In that, I mean, yes, to what Tara is saying about community and sort of putting this work in its place. And I will just fess up to say, like, you know, also as walking through the world as a brown woman, I don't have a choice but to keep going. I'll speak for I statements, but I can imagine my colleagues might feel the same way. I don't have the luxury of stopping. So I do pause and refuel either on the couch or with a good book, but often my community is driven these days by the folks in this room. And I'm like looking particularly over at you, my friend, Clint, like the joy that that we have to find in dismantling this work together, and the community and solidarity and friendship and familial sort of love, affection, and teasing that comes along with doing this work together and linking arm in arm. That is actually the stuff that allows me to stay in the theater and to keep fighting alongside my colleagues.
Yeah, that's beautiful stuff. You know, I love that question because it really makes me, it makes me think about what are those practices that I do, but also why, like why am I still here, right? And I always go back to this thing that, and I think I share Stephanie's complications, but I am fiercely in love with the theater. I love it so much because most of the transcendent spiritual awakenings I've had in my life happened through the theater, right? And I will also say that I've never felt like I belonged more than when I am in the theater, right? And so, but what keeps me going is this hope, this fervent hope that one day that will align with this deep, deep yearning that it will take care of me and my community, that it will finally acknowledge that we all need community to sustain each other. That in spite of the harm, that in spite of the trauma, right, that I can find a place where I can say, hey, it has come to this point where I can actually say, yes, it will sustain me. And I hold up for that. I hold up for that for me, and I hold up for a lot of people. Right. I always go back to Wisiu Watt's beautiful document of the principles of building anti-racist theater, right? Where it says that the show must not, The show must not go on if our well-being is compromised. And I like what that's, the thing that to us has been sort of like the fallacy that we've been believing in is that the theater is the show. The theater is not the show. The theater is you and me. The theater is us conceiving of something that's larger than all of us combined. That's something that really yearns and reaches for a maximum amount of goodness. Right? That is the theater. It is not the show. So the show can actually not go on if our well-being, the very vessel for achieving that goodness that I'm talking about, is being compromised. The show shouldn't go on because the show is not the theater.
I like that quote. I think I want to, yeah, I think we should like print that quote, get it out there. Thank you for that. Last question I have. Post-pandemic, will things change? It's sort of related with what you were already kind of alluding to, Clint, but do you have hope that things will change?
It's already changing.
Yeah, it's already done. It's done.
It's already changing, right? So I think we will be remiss to actually not talk about this, because in the last 6 months, through groups like We See You and a lot of other groups, we have actually seen the thing change. We've seen the gears move, right? Playwrights Horizons just announced that they're eliminating 10 out of 12. Amazing. But what I want people to understand is if you go to any BIPOC theater, chances are most of them have been doing this practice already for a long time. Go to Mai, right? Mai, has been doing the practice of eliminating 10 out of 12s. I love what they're saying. It's like, we are not going to focus on American theater. I want to read it. We have been championing and promoting the works of our artists for over 30 years, and yet we remain invisible to many of our colleagues to the American theater. However, correcting that is not what we want to spend our energies on. And then they just list everything that they spend their energies on. Yes, 10 out of 12s, eliminated. Monday to Friday work weeks, eliminated. Compensate playwrights and designers for attending rehearsals. And setting aside $5,000 for every production to be used by BIPOC, trans, and disabled artists to ensure their safety. And that is a BIPOC theater, right? That is a BIPOC theater who competes for grants with these large theaters who can't even get their shit to do that. Look at your BIPOC theaters. Look at what these theaters are doing. Pour your resources there. If you have money, give it to them. Because really, I also want to just like talk about this thing that, that Tara was talking about in terms of like, there's this paradigm, right, of like the white auteur versus the lazy BIPOC director. I have worked with brilliant geniuses in the American theater who happen to be BIPOC. And every time that director says, that's it, I'm done with this rehearsal, and there's time to go, murmurs of that person being lazy happen. But if it's Ivo van Hove or Steven Soderbergh at the Public, who said, I'm just going to rehearse for 8 weeks. Oh, tour. Brilliant. Genius. Get the fuck out of here, American theater.
I mean, to highlight and imply, like, this change has already came for decades upon decades. The white American theater just kept their eyes closed, didn't look for it, didn't see it. But in regards to this change, like, yes, things are changing right now, right in front of our lives in real time. But also, I think that to throw into the discussion is there is no other choice but to change. Because the American theater also works on this plantation style model where they rely on BIPOC at the very bottom of the pyramid to make money for the white producers at the top. You ain't got your talent. You don't have them people doing the work. What you gonna do? How you put your play up? You're not. Like, you have no choice. And the time for, like, I like to call them like collecting Pokemon cards of diversity is over, because Pokemon cards don't want to play. We ain't gonna play. So what are you gonna do now? No other choice but to change. And whenever folks just have that reckoning, we can change a lot faster. Whenever we leave that defensiveness and that fragility at the door, like sustainability will come faster. What we're doing right now is not sustainable, and it's very, very evident every single day. It's evident in the comment sections. And so like, y'all get, you know how they say, can't bring a horse to water and you can't make a drink. Y'all just drink the water. They know the choice. Just, you are dying of thirst. Drink the water. That's all I got to say about that.
I have nothing to add. I think they think I'm just going to mute.
See, this is why you don't get me on these kind of panels.
Oh,
It's like it's literally career suicide.
No, if we'll go down together, Clint.
it's gonna be fine.
I would just say if the theater ain't
gonna be
hire
fine.
me, Clint, what I say all the time is that if a theater don't want to hire me for me telling them what's what, then I don't want to work there anyway.
Oh, but listen, y'all, you should Google Tara Moses, Pocahontas. Just Google those 3 words, because you will see.
Now I'm really not going to get hired because now people's going to be scared. I'm going to get the shit shut down if they act up.
No, but Tara, I just want to say, it's like brave people like you, basically, who are directors, who basically know we're not going to practice this way. This is wrong. Like it takes folks like you. You know what I mean?
I mean, it also takes, predominantly white institutions like USITT to come together and give us these platforms and their age, and their clout, and not interrupt us and not be asking us stupid shit. So like, it is a lot of us. For all of this movement, it'll take all of us, not just the BIPOC leading the way, not just those of us who are, double fire signs who just say what it is with no consequence. It'll take every single one of us, from the, old white man producer to fresh out of their BFA program BIPOC performer, and anyone and everyone in between. And there are steps that each and every one of us can take now. And one of them is advocating for your neighbor, especially if you have proximity to whiteness and proximity to privilege. I ain't got either of those things, but I just accepted it. Yeah. Anyway, I got the skills. It'll be all right. Oh, we'll make it up. Anyway, but truly,
I'm also just gonna say, I'm gonna name, right, that it doesn't mean that BIPOC and white supremacy are mutually exclusive. So I'm just going to say that, right? I'm just going to say that, the system has been upheld both by BIPOC folks and white people, right? Because it is a system. It is a white supremacist system. And, I don't know of any BIPOC who has no degree of complicity to that, right?
Very true. Very true. And I must say that, to that question of post-pandemic, will things change? I can say that I'm a little more cynical, but I know that I have changed. I know that in having all of these conversations, these panels, attending other panels, being part of other affinity groups and advocacy groups, and having these conversations and being faced with my own biases, that I have been changed and that I cannot unsee things. Once I see it, now it's like, so I think post-pandemic, if I see something, I will have no choice but to say something about it, right? So, and it'll take all of us to see those things and to say something about it. And hopefully, the movement will grow and keep going. All right. So we have come naturally to the end, unless anyone else wants to add anything. So yeah, we've come to the end. If there are any questions that our panelists can answer, now is the time.
There is a really great question in here about respecting holidays. Because again, in the settler state, which does not have a national religion, the default is still Christianity. Yeah, so thank you, Jordan. I mean, it's the same, y'all, it's the same situation. It's whenever we like are advocating for justice, we're advocating for capital J justice, y'all. That's what I like to say. And as like producers, as directors, like having that power and to say, yo, this is Ramadan. How about we not? Or like, one of my favorite holidays is Custer Day, aka the day a Lakota woman killed Custer. I would like to not work on that day and have a good time. Like, as an example, you know, the Seminole Nation Independence Day, I always have to work. Like, but why do I have the Settler State Independence Day off? Right? It's the same sort of situation, is that being just very vocal and advocate for yourself and for your neighbor, like how it's supposed to be. I don't know. I don't know how to answer that other than say, like, be a decent human being. And if you have the power, you can make it happen.
Is there another question?
I feel like the questions that were coming up in the chat, the chat community did an excellent job of responding to the questions. I was clocking it. Good conversation, y'all. Way to be there.
Yeah, I just didn't see anybody say anything in regards to religious questions. So it's like, oh yeah, we can bring that up real quick.
There I am. Hey, everybody. Damn.
Hi.
Damn. Y'all. Come on now. I'd stand up and applaud y'all, but I'd like hurt myself standing up. That's how I am. That's how clumsy I am. Y'all are badasses. Stephanie, Valerie, Tara, and Clint. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And thanks to all of our folks that attended today. Sorry a little bit about the technical difficulties. We tried not to roll that way at USITT, but 2021, you know how it goes. So thank you all for your patience. But what an amazing panel. So as stated, this is one of the many conversations around this topic as we examine the implications about these proposals and what they mean. I invite you all to join us at the USITT Virtually Anywhere Conference online, March 8th through the 12th, where there are sessions that appeal to all areas of design and technology. Our community conversations and collaboration conversations will return in April. You can find out all about the conversations and the conference at usitt.org. Today's session was made possible through the membership dollars and the Tisha Jefferson Fund for Inclusion. You can join or donate at usitt.org. Thank you all again for joining us, and please take good care of yourselves. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, guests, for your emotional labor and sharing your stories.